Cowabunga, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm John, and today we are going to continue our casting experiment by adding characters from DC Comics that were introduced in 1936. Y'all, to say this is a labor of love is an understatement. Um, I got tired of Chat GPT always giving me the same suggestions, so I started using Claude.ai, which is by far a much better chat experience. However, it fills up quicker, so it takes longer because you have to constantly restart the chat all over again or wait 4 hours for it to reset. Also, I have used up my free subscription on Photoleap. So the AI generation process has been a lot more difficult this time around, but I'm getting through it. Uh, so if it's not great, I apologize. I'm doing my best. I am also still trying to teach myself how to do a reaction video. I'm having some technical difficulties with that. I hope to get one out soon. Um, and unfortunately, getting all this together for this video has taken up most of my time, so I haven't been able to read any more comics for a review, but I hope to have another one of those up soon as well. All right, let's get to it. Now, I'm going to lay down one ground rule. For this video, I am not going to retell who all I cast in 1935. I am just going to continue on casting with characters introduced in 1936. So, for this first half of the video, it'll all be supporting characters to features that were already cast in my first video. Okay, so first up, we have little Linda. Now, in 1935, when Little Linda premiered, her father had died. Several family members were warring over who got her and the fortune. And she ended up taking off and riding the rails with a hobo. Well, now in 1936, we meet another hobo, uh, another uncle who's a lot more kindly to her. The uncle also has a son, so another cousin who is jealous at first, but unlike the others, he actually warms up to her and she wins him over. The uncle also has a butler and a valet. You get to meet them. Um, and then she foils a bank robbery, and you get to meet three FBI agents and the mayor of the town. Um, and she helps her cousin find a job. So you also meet a banker and a businessman whom he has applied for jobs with. So let's get down to casting. As Bill the other hobo, we have Spencer Charters. As the bank robbers Butch and Slim, we have Paul Fix and Charles Williams. As her uncle Silas Flint, we have Robert McWade. As his son, we have Frank Albertson. As their butler, we have Robert Homans, and their valet is Maurice Liu. As the mayor of Hillsborough, we have Harry Holman. Uh, the banker is Selmar Jackson. The businessman that ends up hiring Ned is Howard Hickman. And our trio of FBI agents, Watson, X42, and Jimmy, are played by John Dilson, Edward Gargan, and Donald Kerr. I should mention that whenever possible for their actual photos, as opposed to the AIs I've generated, um, I have used pictures from 1936 if I could find them. Also, again, cheap AI, for some reason, it wants to add eyeglasses to the most random pictures, or sometimes not even that. They'll add one half of an eyeglass. Yeah, I don't get it. But again, trying my best. All right, moving on. Let's go to Sandra of the Secret Service, one of my favorites. Our first two castings should have been from 1935 because they had a large part to do in the first story arc that is concluded in 1936. But some of these characters, not just for Sandra of the Secret Service, but in general, are going to be retroactively from 1935 because it makes sense for them to be there, even though they weren't actually introduced till 1936. So first up, we have Count Taurus, who is actually the villain. He is the one conspiring to assassinate Princess Yonda. For that role, we have Gregory Gay. And then the Count de Wax. Now, the Count de Wax is actually a loyalist. He is loyal to the princess, and he's also very observant. He sees through Sandra's impersonation. For that role, we have Miles Mandor. Okay, and then about halfway through 1936, it shifts gears, and Count Taurus has been, taken care of, and then Princess Yonda goes, but my true love, Lawrence, is captured by this neighboring country. Would you please go rescue him? And of course, Sandra does, in order to keep Gavonia happy because it's of military importance to the U.S. So we meet Premier Vakor of Respia. I wanted to get the name right. Respia. Played by Ivan Lebedov. Lebedov. Names, y'all. I'm not good at it. We know this. And then as Lorenz, we have John Lodge. Uh, and along the way, Sandra comes across a very helpful elderly fruit vendor by the name of Grishka. And for that role, I have cast Bottle Rosing. Okay, y'all. I know I'm butchering names. I apologize. Next up, we have Brad Hardy. Now, in 1935, we had Brad Hardy and his girlfriend Lorraine Lewis find this underground kingdom. And in addition to a race of humans, they also found a race of snake men and a race of rat men. And in 1936, they spend the entire time in a kingdom of gray men. So, first up, an old witch doctor by the name of Old Helgar. I have cast Christian Rubb. And then we have General Porgo, who is the leader of these gray men. I have Henry Colker. And then we also are introduced into a trio of three more of these gray men. Tarbo, Morrow, and Helgarth. I have cast Francis McDonald, Clay Clement, and Gavin Muir. So that is Brad Hardy. All right, from the high fantasy of Brad Hardy into the outer space adventures of Don Drake. Now, in 1995, Don Drake and his girlfriend Betty had landed on the planet Sorrow, but they really didn't encounter any intelligent life, just a few monsters, and they explored the planet. In 1936, though, we are introduced to the intelligent life forms, and they are all little people. So this one was a fun one to cast. As Krenon, the captain of the guard, and a rebel who ends up overthrowing the queen. We have Harry Earls, who was probably the most prolific little person actor of the 1930s. As Queen Zira, we have Daisy Earls, who is actually Harry's sister. And then playing Queen Zira's cousin, the mystic ruler Laswan. Uh, do not ask me why the AI decided to put him in a wizard robe and hat. Maybe because I used the word mystic. But as mystic ruler Laswan, I have Angelo Rosito. All right, and now on to some more Earthbound adventures with Barry O'Neill. Barry O'Neill and Inspector Legrand are still hunting Fang Gao. And as a ploy to stop them, Fang Gao kidnaps Legrand's daughter, whom we are introduced to in 1936. Her name is Jeanne Legrand, and I have cast Merle Oberon in that role. And then even more high adventure with Bob Merritt. Uh, Bob and his team have recovered the rocket fuel formula, and he has now been asked by his good friend Brandon to investigate some goings on at Brandon's gold mine. And we are introduced to the character of uh, Prospector Jake, who unfortunately gets unalived and replaced uh, with an impersonator. Um, and then the impersonator also has an accomplice named Fernando, who pretends to be a houseboy, but he's really a henchman. And Bob gets some new members of the team. Lefty, Dusty, Red, and someone they just call Saunders. Now, for Dusty, I have decided to do a gender swap simply because I think that this feature needs a female in it. And when I cast Saunders, I cast it in mind that just 2 more years down the road in 1938, we meet Cyril Speed Saunders, uh, who was a cousin of Hawk Girl, but he had his own uh, detective adventure series in its own right in Action Comics #1. So let's get down to casting, shall we? As Brandon, the owner of the gold mine and longtime friend of Bob Merritt, we have Gene Lockhart. As Prospector Jake and the impersonator of Prospector Jake, I have Joseph Crean. I hope I pronounced that right. As Fernando, I have cast Pedro de Cordoba. As Lefty, I have Frank Coughlin Jr. As Dusty, as I said, I did a gender swap and cast Jean Arthur. As Red, I cast someone who actually has Red as his nickname in IMDb, and that's Donald Red Berry. Um, and then as the youngest member of the team at 18 years old, uh, and who I think would get his own series later, Saunders. I'm going to give him the first name Cyril because that's Speed Saunders' first name. I've cast Eddie Albert. The 1930s, where despite being the second largest decade for Western film, there was a very sore lack of Native American and or uh, Pacific Islander and or Hispanic uh, actors. So For a lot of these, I am going to have to stick to 1930s convention and cast white actors in the roles. This is not my first choice, and I will be correcting it when I do the modern castings of these characters. Skipper Hicks, they have and crew have found the island where the treasure is buried, and they have landed smack dab in between two warring tribes. Um, the leaders of the tribes are given some unfortunate names: King Oki and King Doki. So, as King Oki, I have Mala, who is Inuit, and for King Doki, I have John Hall, who was frequently cast as Native American characters in the 1930s. And then we move on to Buckskin Jim. Uh, First up, we have another white trapper by the name of Dan. I have cast Gwen Big Boy Williams, who did a lot of westerns in the time period. And then we have Pierre. Pierre is half French, half Native American. He is a trapper and not the most scrupulous of fellows. Bruce Cabot, another white actor known for playing Native American roles. Um, as the chief's son, I have cast Junior Durkin. And here's another one of those characters that should have been cast in 1935, but we aren't actually introduced to her until 1936. And that is Marty Halliday, who would have been Zeb's wife and Marie's mother. For this role, I have cast Irene Hervey. All right. And at the end of the first adventure ish, uh, the chief ends up adopting Jim into the tribe. And there is one brave by the name of Little Wolf who is not happy with that. In that role, I have cast Dick Curtis. Moving on, Slim Pickens. Slim Pickens is one of my favorite characters. And in 1936, he meets a circus owner by the name of Colonel Fink. And I have cast Wallace Ford in that role. Moving on to Along the Main Line. In 1936, Jake and Ed get framed for a train robbery. And the entire strip for 1936 is about the robbery and them trying to clear their names. Uh, so we have two train robbers, Slick Carter and Mully. Slick, I have cast Edward Norris, and Mully, I have cast Paul Hurst. And then you have the railroad boss by the name of Mr. Dawkins, who fires Jake and Ed. But it turns out that he's the mastermind and actually framed them. Uh, Spoiler for a comic that is almost 100 years old. Um, in that role, I have cast Porter Hall. All right. And then we have the insurance agent who is investigating the crime, Agent Mulverne. I have cast Ralph Bellamy. From the 1880s Railroad to 1936 Sahara, where Wing Brady and the French Foreign Legion are fighting against the Bedouins. 1936 introduced a lot of new characters to this strip, starting with another sheik by the name of Ali bin Said. I have cast Maurice Moscovich in that role. Again, uh, conventions of the time. Maurice Moscovich was actually cast as very exotic characters throughout his career. We get our first female in the cast, an American kidnap victim by the name of Laura Dean. I have cast Mary Carlisle in that role. Trade caravan leader by the name of Ibn Hajez. In that role, I have cast William Farnham. We get an old wise man by the name of Nasir. I've cast Henry B. Walthall. And then joining the Foreign Legion, we have an Italian by the name of Ranelli, uh, for which I have cast Fortuna Bonanova. Um, y'all, these names. We get a captain in the French Foreign Legion by the name of Chevigny. I have cast Pierre Fresnay. And then we have an American lieutenant who has been sent to check on things. Lieutenant Canfield, I've cast Gordon Jones. Y'all, if you've seen my previous videos, you know that Dr. Occult is my favorite of the features that came out in 1935. And he still remains my favorite through the 1936 comics as well. Um, in 1936, Vampire Master's been defeated, and Dr. Occult goes through 3 different adventures over the course of the year. The first step involves a serial killer named Methuselah who targets people who come from long lived families, thinking that if he kills them, he'll gain their essence and live longer or maybe even forever. In this role, I have cast Arthur Hall, and helping to foil this serial killer is a newspaperman by the name of Burke and a police lieutenant by the name of Lieutenant Day. In these roles, I've cast Alexander Campbell and Wade Bottler, respectively. Y'all, names, I'm telling you. In 1936, we also meet Dr. Occult's butler, who, like a few others we've already named, should have been in 1935. Uh, the butler's name is Jenkins, and I have cast Leonard Muddy. All right. Then the second adventure involves werewolves, and not the fake ones that Vampire Master was creating, but actual werewolves. Our first one that we encounter is Mr. Wesley. I have cast Kenneth Harlan, and then you find out that he's just a pawn, and his landlady at the boarding house, Mrs. Daniels, is actually creating a werewolf army and has to be stopped. For that role, I have cast Lucille Laverne. And then in the final adventure, Zator, a member of the Order of Seven, who raised Dr. Occult and Rose Psychic, comes seeking Occult's help because they are under attack by a demon named Koth. And so in the final adventure, Dr. Occult fights a demon. In the role of Zator, I have cast Robert Warwick. And as Koth the demon, I have cast John Miljan. I like that name, Miljan. All right, moving on. Ramblin' Jim, we get introduced to a couple new characters. A reporter by the name of Click Allen. I have cast Lee Tracy in that role. And then Jim's father, Admiral Craig Hunter, who is a famous explorer and uh, admiral. I have cast Colin Clive in that role. Spike Spalding gets one new character by the name of Wathong, uh, who is a cook on board the ship that they are traveling on. I have cast James B. Leong, Leong in that role. Y'all, I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. And then our animated feature, Don Coyote, has a new little bull by the name of Hash. Um, and for the voice of that role, I have cast Sterling Holloway, who y'all might know as the voice of Winnie the Pooh, and whom I also previously cast in Slim Pickens as the lead role.
All right, guys. So the reason I'm now all the way over on this side of the screen and I've got my hair down is it has gotten cold, but I do want to try and record as much as I can tonight. So I'm just gonna muscle through it. In 1936, Jack Woods introduced us to two more characters um, who are members of Pancho Villa's army. The first is Pedro Velasquez, and the other is Sanchez. For these characters, I have cast Martin Garlaga and Paul Porcasi. All right. Uh, in Magic Crystal of History, Bobby and Binks, we left off with them meeting Tutankhamun. Uh, at the beginning of 1936, they are meeting Menkar, Menkar, who is Tutankhamun's brother. For that role, I have cast Maurice Murphy. And then they view the war between Lydia and Persia as Croesus, the king of Lydia. I have H.B. Warner. As Cyrus, the king of Persia, I have Ian Keith. And then from there, they travel forward yet some more and meet Alexander the Great. In that role, I have cast Francis Lederer. All right, moving on. In Jolly Roger, uh, Jack, Dewey, and Captain Smith have been captured by the pirates when the pirates come upon another ship called the Falcon. In this uh, 1936, we meet the captain of the pirates, Captain Dorgan. I have cast Montague Love. Uh, there is Thorn, who is the boatswain of the Falcon, who betrays the ship to the pirates. I have cast Arthur Aylesworth. As Captain Hale, who is the captain of the Falcon, I have Conway Turl. And as Stumpy Smithers, one of the crewmen on the Falcon, I have cast Billy Gilbert, who is so funny. All right, then we come to Pelion and Asa, which is another animated series. In 1936, we are introduced to Officer Farley and the Chief of Police. Now, in the comics, these are actually drawn as human. But being as how we are setting this on Earth C, uh, that doesn't make much sense. So for Officer Farley, we're going to make him a walrus, and for the Chief of Police, we're going to make him a polar bear. As far as cast goes, I have Ed Wynn as Officer Farley, Frank Morgan, who y'all might know as the Wizard of Oz, as the Chief of Police, and Guy Kibbe as Uncle Julius, who is Pelion's uncle and another penguin. 2023 Super Police. Um, Renee Avalon's true colors have shown. She is actually the ruler of the planet on which Dr. Kidlaw has taken refuge. And she agrees to give up Kidlaw if Rex Cosmos will marry her. And we meet the court bishop who is in on this plot. I have cast Claude King in that role. In Jibby Jones in 1936, we finally are introduced to Jibby's mother. I have cast Dorothy Peterson. And then Sagebrush and Cactus. We are introduced to Sheriff Ben. I have cast Roscoe Aites in this role, who is best known for his stutter, which I think would just be hilarious. We also meet J. Aloysius Witherspoon, who sounds pretty rich. I think he might be related to Betty somehow. Um, in that role, I have Raymond Welburn. And then finally, we have Jed Squeezum. Yeah, Squeezum. Who is a merciless banker. For that role, I have cast Burton Churchill. All right. And then for Billy the Kid, again, we're jumping ahead to where it's Earthsea and they are anthropomorphic animals. So Biff the Bully, I would actually make into a bull. And to voice him, I have Edgar Kennedy.
I want to apologize. I am missing the title cards to a few of these, such as Billy the Kid, and our next one, Vikings, and the one after that, which is Ray and Gale. Um, so in Vikings, at the end of 1935, it is 2 days after Ivar's birth, and he has been abandoned in the forest and guided by Odin, found by Cole the Wise. At the beginning of 1936, we are introduced to Cole's wife, Ighild. For that role, I have cast Greta Mayer. It then fast forwards 20 years, and we see Viking life as Ivar as a young man. And we are introduced to several more uh, people. Jarl Eric, for which I have cast Onslow Stevens. Uh, Loki, the trickster god. I have steered away from the Marvel version, and this is a more traditional Norse version, tall, lanky, redhead with facial scars. For this role, I have cast Sig Ruman. And then we're introduced to a couple of Vikings, Fatfit and Hall. I have cast Tor Johnson and Nils Aether in those roles. Next up is Jorg, chief of the Bearsark clan. I have cast Theodore von Eltz, and as Jorg's wife, Sungrid, I have cast Gwilly Andre. We're also introduced to a druid from the Celtic Isles by the name of Hasluin. For that role, I have cast Forrester Harvey. Uh, and then we are introduced to Ivar himself and his best friend Robert. For Ivar, I have cast David Manners, and for Robert, I have cast Eric Rhodes. Moving on to Ray and Gale, we're introduced to another new character by the name of Joe Macula. Now, it I couldn't find references to who this guy is, and it's not really explained. So, in my mind, he has something to do with the death of Ray and Gale's parents and that whole mystery. For that role, I have cast Morgan Wallace, and then Needles, about our hapless inventor. Um, he has to go to the doctor, and Dr. Bob Lewis, and he ends up roping the doctor into some of his crazy mishaps. For that doctor, I have cast Hobart Kavanaugh. So in 1936, Wing Walker finds himself trying to solve a mystery of a smuggling operation, uh, which is led by the Red Cormorant, no other name given. For the role of this head smuggler, I've cast Willard Robertson. And he is joined by a band of Seminole Indians. As their chief, Kolar, I have cast William Edmonds. And as Little Eagle, I have cast Alex Montoya. 1720 on the Black, we are introduced to four more crooks. One is a second story man named Frog Morton. I've cast Bradley Page. Then we have a Chinese man by the name of Hing Li. I've cast Otto Yamoka. I hope I pronounced that right. And then a Latino man by the name of Alvarado. I have cast Chris Penn Martin. But the brains behind the entire operation is Senora Montoya. I have cast Lita Santos. Now, I know that somewhere in this bevy of maidens is Lita Santos. I just don't know which one it is. Um, and so the AI I have has not been face swapped with the actress because I'm not sure which of these lovely ladies it belongs to. Um, Strange Adventures of Mr. Weed. We are introduced to the loves that they find when they go back in time. First up is Abigail Blumell, who would be opposite Claude Rains's Mr. Weed. Uh, I have cast Madeline Carroll. As her father, Mr. Blumell, I have Halliwell Hol- Holder? Holler? I can't read my own writing. I am so sorry. Um, as Madame Blumell, I have Nella Walker. And then we're also introduced to Emily Jane Throckmorton, who is, she gets herself into a love triangle with Fritz, played by Robert Young, and Uriah Moucher, played by S.C. Sackle. Um, for the role, I have cast Julie Hayden, uh, and I need to reread it because I kind of hope she ends up with Fritz, simply because I always pull for Robert Young. He's just a great leading man. And then as her father, Mr. Throckmorton, I have cast Ferdinand Gottschalk. Gottschalk. Moving on, let's go to Captain Spinnaker. Um, Now, Captain Spinnaker, as I've said in my previous videos, makes no sense whatsoever. And so the way I envision it, it's a boarding house And this retired sea captain lives half of his life in a fantasy land. And all of the other uh, people in the boarding house take on the roles of the people in his fantasies. Uh, in 1936, we are introduced to a couple of Polynesians. So, in my mind, they would be a young Polynesian couple moving in. Uh, and they are named Lulu and Cuckoo, 1936 people. Uh, when I do my 2024 casting, I will definitely change those names. Um, but as Lulu, we have Lotus Long, who is actually Polynesian or half so. Uh, and as Cuckoo, I have cast Tiro Shimada, who is actually Japanese. And the picture I have here is from about 40 years in the future because I could not find one of him in 1936, despite the fact that he was making movies at the time. So that would be Captain Spinnaker. All right, y'all, we are finally finished with all of the new characters that are being added to 1935 features. Now we get to dive into brand new 1936 features. We're going to start off with Chubby. Chubby is another one of those R gang style comedies. The main character's name is Chubby, and his friends are Slimsy, Oscar, and Arabella. And of course, you got the grumpy old man that just hates kids. So, in the role of Chubby, I have Joe Cobb. As Slimsy, I have Sidney Miller. As Oscar, I have Dickie Jones. As Arabella, I have Juanita Quigley. And then as the grumpy old man, I have Harry Davenport. Moving on, we come to Woozy Watts. Now, Woozy Watts, I'm kind of excited for because this is one of those few characters from the early days of comics, pre-Superman, that actually survived for quite some time. He it starts off normal enough. He's got a job with a diner as a sandwich board man. Prankster writes something on his back, which gets him into trouble. But from there, it takes a very surreal turn, and uh, yeah, he goes on some very weird adventures. But after his own feature ends and a few-year hiatus, then the same character comes back as the sidekick to Plastic Man, and that's what makes it exciting for me because he actually survived as Plastic Man's sidekick all the way up into the late 70s, early 80s. So, as Lucy Watts, I have Lou Costello, who was great at playing a heavyset man with in surreal situations. Um, as Mike, the diner owner, I have William Frawley. As Joe, the prankster, I have Alan Jenkins. And then once things start getting surreal, we are introduced to two more characters. Whiskers, I have cast Henry Armetta, and Sourface, for which I have cast Donald Meek. After Woozy Watts, we get into Rusty. Now, over the early years of comics, there were actually three strips with the name Rusty in them. First came Rusty, then Rusty and his pals, and then I forget the name of the third one. I think it was like Rusty at Cliffside or something. And so in my mind, these three strips are all the same character, um, who starts off as a preteen in Rusty, and then a teenager in Rusty and his pals. which is the first one is like a family comedy, and then it gets into more of a Goonies type feel, and then the final one is more of a late teen, early adult, uh, Riverdale kind of adventures. So in 1936, we are only introduced to Rusty and one of his neighbors, Ms. Pinchpenny. As Rusty, I have cast Bobby Breen, and as Miss Pinchpenny, Margaret Hamilton, who you all know as the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz. So, y'all remember in my first video where I thought Freddie Bell was a teenager, but he was really a young, like, little child? Well, this time I went the opposite direction. Hubert in the strip is actually about middle-aged to older man, and I got confused and cast a toddler. So we're just gonna run with it. So I have Hubert, and there is a movie star who is mentioned named Inna Pinch, and uh, she is never actually seen in the strip. However, this being a sitcom, I would definitely have her show up. So, as Hubert, I have Baby Louie. I have no idea what his real name is. That was his stage name. And he performed from the time he was an infant until he was about 4 years old, which would have been 1936. And then as Ena Pinch, I have Kay Francis. Moving on, we have Gee Whiz, which is another teen comedy. We are introduced to G and his little brother Blister. So as Gee Whiz, I have Jackie Cooper, and as Blister, I have Marvin Stevens. Then we come to Sam the Porter. Now, if y'all saw my first two casting videos, you know I didn't cast Chico Chaco for 1935 because of the racist material. And I only did it in for the 2024 video because of you could get Hispanic actors and they could have a say in it. Well, Sam the Porter, although it is an African American in a stereotypical job, uh, I don't find it racist because he's usually the smartest person in the room. Uh, and I appreciate that. So I did go on and cast Sam the Porter for 1936 because, like I said, I he's usually the smartest man in the room, and uh, despite having a stereotypical job, and there were plenty of African American actors to choose from who would have a say in the script. So for Sam, I have Eddie Rochester Anderson. And as the hotel manager, his boss, Mr. Brown, I have Franklin Pangborn. Okay, now we come to another one of those script features that excites me. Uh, Radio Squad, originally entitled Calling All Cars, Adventures of the Radio Squad, uh, lasted until about the mid 40s, so not too long in the greater scheme of things. But along with Federal Men, who I'll get to in a few minutes, um, they had the very first official DC crossover where characters from Radio Squad assisted the feds on a case and they crossed over into each other's strips for a couple months. I thought that was really cool when I found that out. So, Now, Radio Squad does have quite a large cast. Um, it follows rookie cop Sandy Keene. I have cast Randolph Scott in that role. His partner Jimmy Trent. I have cast Dennis Morgan. Uh, the police commissioner, Commissioner Bailey. I have cast C. Aubrey Smith, and then his daughter Doris Bailey is also the love interest of Sandy. For that role, I have cast Joan Bennett. The Baileys have a butler. I've cast Eric Bloor. And then the leader of the crime syndicate that they are trying to take down over the course of their adventures is known as the Purple Tiger, for which I have cast Richard Liu. You get a couple of his henchmen, Burke and Scotty. I've cast Jack LaRue and Mark Lawrence in those roles. And you got his gun mall girlfriend, Myrna. I have cast Gertrude Michael. Yeah, I see this as like a police procedural drama, uh, like Dragnet or in later years CSI kind of thing. So yeah, I'm actually excited for this one. Okay, I am really excited for this next one too. It's called Pep Morgan. Now, Pep is a sports savant. I mean, this kid is good at football, track, boxing, skiing, you name a sport, he's good at it. Now, while casting this, I am going to use a convention that is as old as Hollywood itself, and I am casting men who are in their 20s to play high school students. So, as Pep Morgan, our sports hero, I have Larry Buster Crab, who I absolutely adore in the Flash Gordon movies. So, yeah. So he's our lead. Um, he has a coach. The coach is not named. However, as with Bill Bojangles Robinson, we are also introduced to several of his classmates and uh, members of his football team: Bob Emery, Chuck Kelly, Tubbs Miller, and Lanko Jewell, for which I have cast Jimmy Lydon, Richard Arden, Snub Pollard, and Fred McMurray, respectively. We are also introduced to a rival from another school by the name of Peter, for which I have cast Bruce Bennett. All right, moving on, we have Ankh. Ankh is a man with a talking dog. It was a very short-lived strip. As Ankh, I have cast Frank McHugh, and as the voice of the dog, I have cast Mel Blanc, who you know from all the Warner Brothers cartoons. Next up is Bradley Boys. The Bradley Boys are twins who get lost while camping in the wilderness, and then they run across a fugitive from justice, and he like forces them to come along with him as hostages or something like that. I forget. It's been a while since I read these. I forget exactly how it works. But as Tom and Jack Bradley, I have David Holt and Delmar Watson. And as Harry Matson, the fugitive, I have cast Humphrey Bogart. Uh, and then we have come to Algiers Variety Show. Now, Algier is actually the name of the artist who drew not only this, but Woozy Watts, Sam the Porter, and several other features in early DC Comics. Uh, in this one, it follows Joe. Joe is one of those hapless, you know, everything goes wrong for him kind of guys. Um, and he gets a job at a diner as a sandwich board man. And so we're introduced to the diner owner and his secretary. Um, and although written as straight comedy, the fact that it's called Variety Show, for the role of Joe, I have cast Eddie Cantor. Eddie Cantor is best known for his singing voice, so and comedy. So I figure, you know, Joe could be this hapless comedic role that occasionally bursts into song, and hence the variety in the title. As Mr. Smith, the diner owner, I have Edward Arnold, and then as his secretary, I have Glenda Farrell. Okay, up next we have Mark Marson. Mark Marson is a member of the Intergalactic Police. Sound familiar? So, in my mind, um, the role of Captain Waldo should have been introduced in S- Super Police so that this could be a direct spinoff, which is the way I'm playing it out in my head. So, as Mark, our captain and hero, we have Ross Alexander. Now, I'm going to say that for this particular project, I love all the AIs that came out. They look so good. And is it just me, or does he not look like Jason Bateman in the AI photo? Here, let me expand them so you can see. Yeah, I think he looks just like Jason Bateman. Anyways, moving on. As Captain Waldo, I have Otto Kruger. As Dorais, Dorais, who would be his partner and love interest, I have Anna May Wong. As Professor Hillary, I have Otto Warnick. As Gail Hillary, the femme fatale, I have Hedy Lamarr. As Sergeant Montague, I have Thomas Mitchell. And so Professor Hillary has been kidnapped. His daughter may or may not have had something to do with that. And the trail leads to the planet Ciro, Ciro. And we are introduced to their king, Monarch Sarno, whom I have cast with Gustav von Sifritz. I hope I pronounced that right. And a couple of his guards, Operative 26 and Operative 53. I have cast Hans Albers and Gustav Diesel in those roles. And like I said, I love the AIs for this one. And then we come to Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers has a huge cast, uh, mainly because they kept changing the name and the direction while in the middle of it. So it starts off with the name Captain Bill of the Texas Rangers, as you can see. But then it becomes Captain Jim of the Texas Rangers. And then it becomes uh, Bob of the Texas Rangers. And then it goes back to Captain Jim. So, but it's the same story throughout. It's so weird. So, all these different names, yeah, they're different characters in my mind. So as Captain Bill, I have George Montgomery. As Captain Jim, I have Preston Foster. As Ranger Bob, I have Richard Dix. As Ranger Lee, I have William Gargan. And as Ranger Jed Riley, I have Chester Morris. And we're introduced to a character named Joe, spelled J-O, who is Bob's ranch foreman. And I decided to do a gender swap here and cast a female in the role. So I have Mary Nash in that role. And then we have two children, Jane and Johnny, who are the witnesses to a train robbery. For Jane, I have Betty Jean Haney. And for Johnny, I have Billy Cook. All right. And then you find out that the mastermind behind the train robbery is a local rancher by the name of Mr. Lane, for which I have cast Edward Ellis. And his henchman is named Joe, Joe, for which I have cast Lloyd Nolan. All right. And then there's another henchman by the name of Scar. I have cast Charles Middleton in that role. And then once the whole bank robbery storyline is done, we're uh, into a story about some cattle rustlers. There's four of them by the name of Rusty, Spike, Fletch, and Scrub. I have cast Morris Kornofsky, Richard Comte, and Dan Durian, and Jack Mulhall in those roles. Around the same time as the Rustlers were introduced to a character by the name of Jess, who is a townsperson. I have cast Grant Mitchell in that role. All right, next up we have a comedy called Daredevil Dunk. Uh, Dunk is a stuntman, and it is a comedy. And it was important for me to actually cast a stuntman in the role. For this reason, I have cast David Sharp as Dunk, who was a stuntman in the 30s and beyond, but he also did some acting in minor roles in westerns. As his sleazy manager Drizzle, I have cast Sheldon Leonard. And we're going to move on to Beanie. Beanie is another one of those Leave It to Beaver style family comedies. For the title role of Beanie, I have cast George Ernest. As his bully, Red, I have cast David Duran. As his mother, I have cast Helen Benson. For his Aunt Matilda, I have cast Marjorie Gateson. And as Beanie and Red's teacher, Mr. Schultz, I have cast Oscar Homolka. All right. And then we have Sarah Lou Sunshine. Sarah Lou is a Pollyanna type. She is all about helping people and spreading joy and sunshine wherever she goes. Um, for this role, I have cast Marilyn Nolden. And as Sarah Lou's little sister, Rita Lou, I have cast Sybil Jason. And then one of the friends she helps out is named Sunny, for which I have cast Rand Brooks. All right, y'all. I can see the finish line for this video. It's coming soon. Next up, we have Federal Men. As I mentioned earlier when I did Radio Squad, Federal Men was part of the very first DC crossover between those two strips. So this is kind of exciting for me. And it follows Federal Men or FBI agents. We start off with a rookie by the name of Steve Carson. And for that role, I have Alan Bates. As his partner, I have, by the name of Ralph Ventnor, I have Wayne Morris. Um, as the chief the bureau chief where they work, I have Kent Taylor, and FDR makes an appearance, which would be the first appearance of a real life person in a DC comic. Uh, so to play FDR, I have Melvin Douglas, and then the villains for this first story arc are a bank robber and his girlfriend. So as the gun mall, I have Mary Astor, and as the bank robber, I have John Garfield. Moving on, we have Inch. Now, Inch is another kid-oriented comedy. Um, and the thing about this one is it has Pincus, who is also in Spike Spalding. And you don't know if these stories take place before or after the um, events of Spike Spalding. Um, and Inch is actually a Caucasian male for more diversity, and because I think he would do better as Pincus's brother than as a friend. I have an African American in the role, specifically Sammy Morrison. So, Ol Ozbop is a comic strip about an older man. Um, it, it would work great as just a straight up comedy sitcom. However, a few of the strips seemed a little pedantic to me. So instead, I'm envisioning Ol Ozbop as an educational program that would be shown on PBS after school, like Mr. Rogers or Bill Nye the Science Guy, where the kids are actually learning. Specifically, Ol Ozbop's grandson is actually learning while in the context of this sitcom. So, as Ol Oz, I've got Ferdinand Munier. As his wife Evelyn, I have Clara Blendick. As their grandson, who would be uh, being taught all this stuff, Gordon, I have Tommy Bupp. And then in one of the stories, there's this younger couple, Bill and Lucille, uh, who want to break up, but Oz gets them back together. And I see them as recurring characters, kind of learning from the old married couple, teaching the new married couple. So in the roles of Bill and Lucille, I have Russell Hopton and Anne Shirley. And then Olaz has a friend named Victor who thinks he's a comedian, but all of his jokes land very flat. For that role, I have cast Charlie Foy, who is actually a very good comedian. Um, but it takes a good comedian to play that role. All right, then we come to Slim and Tex. Slim and Tex takes place on a dude ranch, and the titular characters are employees of said dude ranch. The dude ranch itself is owned by Miss Helen, and some of their first customers are Grace Fowler, who is actually this rich heiress, think Paris Hilton type. Uh, and she is being sent to the Dude Ranch because her father has been receiving um, threats against her. Uh, so she also has this bodyguard named Algernon T. Entwistle, uh, who is kind of in love with her, but is doing his duty as a bodyguard. And then we have Spider Callus, who is an assassin sent to unalive Grace. Uh, so let's get into some castings. As Slim, I have Tom Keene, who also went under the um, stage name Richard Powers. As Tex, I have Tim McCoy. As Miss Helen, I have Margaret Lindsay. As Algernon, I have Alan Deinhardt. As Grace, I have June Travis. And as Spider, I have Eduardo Cianella. Next, we have Andy Handy. He sometimes had the subtitle Man of Action. This is a comedy, straightforward. So I cast it as a comedy with L. Brundle in the role, and I actually made him a handyman. Um, it just made more sense. Moving on to McGinnis of the Mounties. This is like a police procedural about member of the Royal Canadian Mounties. As Dan McGinnis, I have Raymond Massey. As his boss, Major Hall, I have Donald Woods. And then there's Old Man Dubois. I have cast Jean Hersholt. And then his daughter Yvonne, I have cast Lily Demita. Now, I do remember one scene where the two of them are caught in a fire and they have to throw the blanket over them. Yeah. So I needed an actress who could do the action, and uh, that's what the AI gave me was Lily Demita. Okay, and then we have a couple of outlaw gunmen, Kenyon and Barton. I have cast Paul Kavanaugh and Douglas Dumbrill, respectively. Then we come to Gufo the Great. Gufo the Great was another comedy, and like many of these comedies, the supporting cast is seen like once and goes away, but I would actually make it a sitcom keeping the supporting cast. So, as Gufo, who is a stage magician, I have Anthony Marsh. As his assistant, Marie, I have Dorothy Wilson. As Marie's boyfriend, Victor, I have Eddie Gribben. Uh, at some point, Gufo goes to a benefit and performs that benefit. A philanthropist by the name of Mrs. Brown is quite taken with him. For that role, I have cast Maud Ebern. And then Gufo does have a girlfriend of his own by the name of Emily. I have cast June Martell. And as Mrs. Potts, her disapproving mother, I have cast Emma Dunn. All right, folks, last five features. First up, Dale Daring. Uh, Dale had a very interesting history in DC Comics. Most often, she was a reporter. Sometimes she was actually a police officer herself. And what would happen is she would go on an adventure and then she'd go on a hiatus for a year, 2 years, and then she'd have another adventure. And that lasted all the way up until the 60s. So for this first adventure, we got quite a large cast. As Dale herself, I have Nan Gray. As Lieutenant Dick Sparks, who was her first love interest, I have Dennis O'Keefe. As Stitch, who is a crook, I have Willie Fung. As Dr. Millard, the scientist, I have Henry Stevenson. As the old hermit she meets, I have Harry Bursford. Uh, okay, and then as Mr. Daring, her father, I have Lewis Stone. Now, her father ends up being kidnapped by General Sin Lee, who is an Asian mountain bandit. for which I have cast Tetsu Kumai. And then we have another cop by the name of Captain Brewster. I have cast Pierre Watkin. And then a servant by the name of Ali. I have cast Noble Johnson. Now, Noble Johnson was one of the first African American actors to receive any sort of notoriety. Uh, and he was frequently cast not only as Native Americans, but Hindu Indians, Native Americans, um, Polynesians, anyone with darker skin tone. He got the role. And he even started the first African American film company. I found that out recently. It was kind of cool to find that out. All right, moving on, we have Sandor. Speaking of India, Sandor is very much like Tarzan, only he was raised by wild dogs instead of apes. As Sandor, I have cast Glenn Morris, and as the evil Raja Maharaja, I have cast Joseph Schildkraut. Um, Again, names, sorry. Steve Conrad was another adventure series of the time. It had quite a large cast, various scientists going to this one particular island called Dolorosa Island. And they think that, they're the first Caucasians to set foot there. And yeah, there's a mad scientist already there by the name of Professor Bombay, and he's been experimenting on the natives. So the natives aren't too happy. Cast this thing. Okay, as Steve the Adventurer, we have Brian Dunleavy. As Hugo Judd, the ship captain, I have Walter Pigeon. As Keith Rowland, the biologist, I have Herbert Marshall. As Mr. Rutherford, the banker that is bankrolling this expedition, I have Reginald Olin. As his wife, Myra Rutherford, who insists on going, we have Helen Chandler. As Sam the cook, I have Stuart Irwin. As the great Devachan, who is the leader of the natives, I have Chief Yolachi. I hope I got that right. I'm sorry if I messed it up. And as Professor Bombay, I have John Ray or John Ray. Wray? I don't know. All right. Hard Luck Harry. Hard Luck Harry is a new animated feature because it takes place on Earthsea because all of the characters are dogs. And that's how it's originally drawn. I'm not, putting something on Earthsea just to put it on Earthsea. So all the characters are dogs. Harry is actually shanghaied onto this pirate ship and forced to serve on this pirate ship by Shanghai Pete. And then you have several other dogs who are on there, either as pirates or servants to the pirates by the name of Slugger, Joe, and Fu Chow. So, as Harry, I have cast. Uh, Keep in mind this is voice work. I have cast Dick Powell as Shanghai Pete. I have cast Lionel Stander as Slugger. I have cast Charles Butterworth. As Joe, I have cast Arthur Treacher, who you might know as or remember as the constable from Mary Poppins. And as Fu Chow, I have cast James Burke. Now, the last feature I'm going to talk about is actually a series of features. It was on my previous two videos uh, because all these early comics had like pages of just one panel gags, uh, just like family circles on Sunday style. They have a little circle or a little square, and that's all they got to tell you one joke and try and make you laugh. So, in my mind, I would collect all of these and give it one name. The longest running of these strips in the Golden Age was called Sideshow, and I would turn all these strips into seeds for a Saturday Night Live sketch comedy show. Uh, Now, I had already cast the 16 cast members for 1935. I failed to catch, though, that Hugh Herbert was already in another live action project. And for 1936, I have now cast Ed Wynn and Billy Gilbert in live action projects. So I would remove the three of them from the cast and replace them with Herman Bing, Misha Auer, and Arthur Treacher, who again is the constable in Mary Poppins. That's it for me for this video. Surf's up. I gotta go. I've got lots of new projects I plan on working on. I'm still trying to teach myself to do a reaction video, and I'm also thinking about writing a book. We'll see how that works out. All right. Y'all be safe and enjoy these AI images.